Imagine walking into your office lobby after a long work trip, only to find your life's work stuffed into black garbage bags like yesterday's trash. That's exactly what happened to me, and even now thinking about it makes my chest tighten. My name is Sahara Collins, I'm 32 years old, and until recently I was a project manager at a mid-sized marketing firm where I gave everything I had. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like and sharing it with the people you care about. For almost 8 years that company had been like a second home to me. I was the one who stayed behind when everyone else went home early. I was the one answering client emails at midnight, putting out fires and stepping in whenever someone else dropped the ball. I thought my hard work meant something. I thought my loyalty mattered. Every time the company faced a crisis, I was there holding things together. And despite the exhaustion, I felt proud of the person I was becoming, a woman who refused to give less than her best. I wasn't just an employee, I was invested in the future of the business. I passed up better offers because I believed we were building something meaningful. My family and friends often told me I worked too much, that I deserved better recognition, but I brushed it off because I thought eventually it would pay off. I thought people noticed the sacrifices. I thought the late nights and early mornings meant I was building a foundation for something long-term. Looking back, maybe I was too trusting, maybe I believed in the wrong people, but at the time I was proud to be part of a company that I thought valued me. That's why that moment in the lobby hit me so hard. To see everything I had worked for crammed into garbage bags, to be treated like nothing after years of commitment. It broke something inside me. But what I didn't know then was that this betrayal would light a fire in me I didn't realize I had, and that fire would change everything. At work, I had built a reputation for being the one people could always count on. Whenever a deadline was at risk or a project started falling apart, somehow my name would get pulled into the conversation. I didn't complain, I just did the work. I believed stepping up was the right thing to do, and for a while I thought that would earn me respect and security. I became the person clients asked for when things were rough, and I took pride in turning difficult situations around. It wasn't easy, but every success made me believe I was on the right path. Over the years, I pulled in contracts that helped the company grow. I pitched to people who initially wanted nothing to do with us and convinced them to take a chance. I stayed patient with frustrated customers, smoothing things over until they trusted us again. Some of the company's biggest accounts started with me, and I carried that weight on my shoulders without hesitation. I thought my efforts were obvious, but in reality the recognition rarely came my way. The man at the top, Clinton Reeves, had a way of making sure people like me stayed in the shadows. He carried himself with this constant arrogance, as if everyone else existed to make him look good. Whenever I presented ideas, he either brushed me off or worse, found a way to repackage my work and make it his own during board meetings. It was a routine I had grown used to, my voice drowned out, his ego inflated. Still, I pushed through, telling myself that hard work couldn't be ignored forever. In the middle of all this, there was one person who helped me keep my balance, Imani Brooks. She sat 2 desks away and had a sharp eye for things I sometimes didn't want to admit. More than once she warned me about Clinton. "Sahara, he doesn't like how good you are at this," she'd say. I'd laugh it off, insisting that work spoke louder than jealousy, but deep down, I knew she saw something I was too stubborn to face. Imani reminded me not to lose myself in proving my worth to people who didn't want to see it. Even with her warnings, I carried on, convinced that staying loyal and pushing harder would change the outcome. I had no idea just how wrong I was. When Clinton called me into his office one Thursday afternoon, I didn't know what to expect. He leaned back in his chair with that practiced confidence of his and told me there was a client in Dallas that could make or break the quarter. He spoke as if the whole company depended on this deal, and then he looked me straight in the eye and said I was the only one capable of pulling it off. For a moment I felt a flicker of validation. After years of giving everything, here was a chance to prove myself in a way no one could ignore. The assignment came with almost no warning. I had just a few days to prepare before flying out. I stayed up late, combing through every detail about the client's brand, their struggles, and their competitors. I rehearsed until my throat was sore, determined to show them not just a plan, but a vision of how we could bring their goals to life. Beneath the pressure, I carried a sense of pride that I had been chosen, even if part of me wondered why Clinton trusted me with something so important when he rarely gave me credit for anything else. The trip itself felt like stepping into another world. Dallas was warm, the client's office sleek and intimidating, filled with people who were cautious about working with new partners. When I walked into the meeting room, I felt nerves buzzing in my chest, but I held on to my preparation. I laid out our ideas with confidence, walking them through each step, addressing concerns before they even raised them. Questions came at me from every direction, but instead of stumbling, I found myself energized, steady, almost fearless. By the end of the pitch, the room felt different. The skepticism had shifted into interest, even excitement. When the client shook my hand and confirmed they were ready to sign with us, a wave of relief washed over me. All those nights spent preparing had been worth it. I boarded the plane home with a rare smile, thinking this would finally be the moment Clinton couldn't overlook. The account was ours and I had delivered it. For once, I let myself believe that my return to the office would be different. As the city lights of home came into view through the plane window, I pictured walking into the building to a nod of respect, maybe even a word of thanks. I wasn't asking for a parade, just acknowledgement. After all, I had done exactly what was asked of me and more. With that thought in my heart, I stepped off the plane, ready to return, unaware of the storm waiting for me on the other side. Dragging my suitcase through the familiar glass doors of the building, I felt the weight of travel pressing down on my shoulders. My body ached from the flight, but inside I carried the kind of tired joy that comes after doing something worthwhile. I expected to head straight upstairs, drop my bag by my desk and finally breathe. Instead, what I saw made my steps falter. Near the front desk, just beside the elevators, a cluster of black garbage bags sat piled against the wall. At first, I thought it was cleaning day, that the janitorial crew had left something behind. But then I noticed pieces of my life poking out. My framed picture of my mother, the blue notebook I always carried for brainstorming, the small mug I used every morning. My throat tightened. Those weren't just trash bags. They were my years, stuffed and discarded in plain view. The security guard shifted uncomfortably behind his podium, trying to look busy with a clipboard. My chest burned as I walked closer, pulling at one of the bags to see more of my things inside. A lump rose in my throat, but before I could ask, his voice came low and shaky. "Sorry, Miss Collins. Orders from upstairs." He didn't meet my eyes, as if ashamed to even be delivering that line. For a second I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at everything I had built in that office, reduced to a pile of trash for anyone passing by to see. People streamed in through the glass doors, some heading toward the elevators, others out for lunch. A few co-workers slowed their steps when they noticed me, but not one of them stopped. They looked away, whispering to each other, then hurried on like nothing had happened. Their avoidance cut deeper than words. Humiliation sank into my bones, heavier than the exhaustion I'd carried from the trip. I wanted to scream, to demand answers right there in the lobby, but my voice stayed trapped inside my chest. The place that had been a second home to me suddenly felt hostile, like the walls themselves had turned against me. I gripped the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles ached, forcing myself not to break down in front of the strangers passing by. In that frozen moment, betrayal wrapped around me tighter than the fatigue of travel. The garbage bags weren't just filled with office supplies. They held every ounce of effort, every night I stayed late, every weekend I sacrificed. To see them dumped like that was more than cruel. It was deliberate. And as I stood there staring at what used to be mine, I knew something inside me had cracked. I refused to stand there in the lobby like a discarded shadow. My legs carried me toward the elevators with more force than I realized I had. The ride up felt endless, every second filled with anger that threatened to spill over. When the doors finally opened, I rushed out, ready to demand an explanation. But as soon as I swiped my keycard at the glass doors leading into the office, nothing happened. I tried again. The red light blinked back at me, mocking me with its refusal. My access had been cut off. Heart pounding, I rattled the handle, ignoring the curious glances from people walking past. The space that once felt like mine was now sealed away, like I had never belonged there. Rage flared inside me. Without thinking, I marched straight to the Human Resources Department down the hall, my suitcase trailing behind me like a heavy reminder of the trip I had just returned from. The HR manager, a woman named Denise, barely looked up when I walked in. When I demanded to know what was going on, she gave me a scripted expression of pity that only made me angrier. "Zahara, the decision was made while you were away. Your position has been terminated due to performance concerns." The words hung in the air like poison. Performance concerns? I had just landed the biggest account of the quarter. I laughed bitterly, asking how they could justify such a thing. Denise shifted uncomfortably in her chair. then lowered her voice as if the walls might be listening. Look, I'm not supposed to say much, but Clinton presented the Dallas deal as his own success. The board praised him for it. He's already moved someone else into your office. The blood drained from my face. My deal, the one I had worked on day and night, had been stolen right out from under me. My anger turned into something sharper when she mentioned the replacement. Marissa Reeves. Clinton's niece. A woman with no real experience, someone who spent more time scrolling through her phone than actually working. It all made sense in a cruel way. The trip had been nothing more than a setup. While I was hundreds of miles away proving myself, Clinton was building his narrative, painting me as unnecessary so he could slide his family into my role. The betrayal wasn't just about losing a job. It was about being used and discarded to secure his own power. Standing there in that sterile office, I felt a cold clarity settle in. They thought they could silence me, replace me, erase me. But the truth had a way of coming out, and I wasn't about to let this story end with me packing up and walking away quietly. The walk out of that building felt heavier than any journey I had ever taken. Each step echoed with the weight of what had just happened, as if the ground itself knew I no longer belonged there. My chest was tight, my thoughts tangled, and the city outside seemed louder, harsher, uncaring. By the time I reached my car, I could barely hold myself together. The wheels shook beneath my hands as I drove home, tears blurring the road. Inside my apartment, silence wrapped around me like a punishment. I set my suitcase down, staring at it without moving because I couldn't decide which hurt more, the exhaustion of travel or the emptiness waiting for me now. Memories of the office flooded my mind, not just the long hours but the moments I had traded away. Birthdays I missed, Sunday dinners skipped, promises broken to friends because I told myself work came first. Every sacrifice I made for that company pressed down on me now like a cruel joke. I curled up on the couch, replaying every moment I had defended them. Every time I had told someone it was worth it, that loyalty meant something, that dedication would pay off. Now all I could see was how much of myself I had given away to people who never cared. I had believed I was building something solid, only to realize it was nothing but sand slipping through my fingers. It wasn't long before my mother came by. Delilah had a way of sensing when I was breaking, and the moment she saw my face she pulled me into her arms. I sank into her embrace, finally letting the tears flow freely. She held me without judgment, her voice steady and warm. Baby, no job defines you. They can take the paycheck but they can't take your dignity. Don't let them strip you of who you are. Her words struck deep. I wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't understand, but the truth was she did. She had lived long enough to know what betrayal felt like, and she wanted me to remember that my worth wasn't tied to an office door or a CEO's approval. As I lay there listening to her steady heartbeat, it hit me with full force. This wasn't just about losing employment. This was about being used, disrespected, and discarded after years of devotion. They hadn't only taken away my role, they had tried to take away my pride. And that realization stung more than anything else. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the bitterness in my chest too sharp to let me rest. Every word from HR, every image of my belongings stuffed in those bags, replayed over and over until the anger started to feel like fuel. For the first time since walking out of that building, I wasn't just broken, I was determined. They had stolen credit for my work, painted me as disposable, and shoved me aside like I was nothing. I couldn't let that stand. I pulled out my laptop and began digging through everything I had kept. I had always been organized, storing every project, email thread, and proposal. And there was the proof. Detailed presentations I created, drafts with my name and timestamps, email confirmations from the Dallas client thanking me personally for my effort. Every line of communication pointed to me as the person responsible for securing the deal. Clinton could spin his story however he wanted, but the evidence told the truth. As I sorted through files, I thought about the people still stuck in that office, the ones too afraid to speak up. Imani's face came to mind first. She had always been honest with me about the games Clinton played. When I reached out to her, she didn't hesitate. Late at night, we met at a small diner away from downtown. She slid a folder across the table, her eyes sharp but worried. Inside were memos and internal notes, records showing Clinton's niece being positioned for my role weeks before my trip. The setup had been planned long before I even boarded that plane. Imani wasn't the only one who quietly reached out. Another colleague sent me copies of meeting minutes where Clinton had conveniently left my name out of discussions, taking credit for strategies I had put together. Piece by piece, the picture grew clearer. My removal wasn't a sudden decision. It was a calculated move to push me out while propping up someone unqualified simply because of family ties. Each document I collected steadied me. The pain was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was sharpening into resolve. They had expected me to walk away quietly, humiliated and defeated. They thought I'd shrink under the weight of their lies. But with every file I saved, every page of proof stacked on my desk, I felt a fire grow stronger inside me. I wasn't going to let them bury me in silence. If they wanted to throw me out like garbage, then they had underestimated just how far I would go to show the world who really belonged in that office. The next step wasn't going to be loud or desperate. It had to be smart. With all the proof I'd gathered, I knew I had something strong, but evidence on its own wasn't enough. I needed leverage. That's when the thought hit me, the Dallas client. They had seen me work, trusted me, and signed on because of my presentation. If anyone could separate the truth from Clinton's story, it was them. I drafted a careful email, not one filled with accusations or bitterness, but a simple message of gratitude. I thanked them for trusting in the partnership and mentioned almost in passing that I was no longer part of the company. It was the truth, but I let it sit there quietly without explanation, like a seed waiting to grow. Within hours my phone rang. It was the client's director, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Wait a second, Sahar. What do you mean you're not with them anymore? You led every meeting. You built the entire pitch." Clinton barely introduced himself on a call. He didn't do anything. His frustration spilled out quickly and I stayed calm, letting his outrage speak louder than mine ever could. I explained gently that changes had been made while I was away, and that the company had decided to move forward without me. I didn't badmouth anyone, I didn't need to. The silence on the other end told me everything. They felt deceived. After a pause, the director's voice hardened. "If they think they can cut you out and still keep our business, they're mistaken. Either they bring you back into the lead role or we'll take our contract elsewhere. In fact, if you're open to it, we'd rather follow you than deal with someone who lied about who handled this project." The words settled into me like armor. I had gone into that call searching for confirmation, and instead I found power. They were willing to walk away from a multi-million-dollar deal if I wasn't part of it. That wasn't just validation, it was leverage. I didn't rush into making demands. Instead, I documented every word, every email that followed, making sure the company's dependence on me was undeniable. I kept my tone professional, my moves quiet, never giving Clinton or his niece the chance to accuse me of rash behavior. They wanted me erased, but now they were the ones standing on shaky ground. For the first time since that lobby scene, I didn't feel discarded. I felt steady, calculating, and ready. Clinton had gambled on me being powerless, but he had forgotten the one rule I had always lived by. The truth has a way of fighting back, especially when you know how to use it. It didn't take long for the first domino to fall. The Dallas client didn't waste time with ultimatums or second chances. Within a week, they sent an official notice withdrawing their account. A contract worth $5 million gone in an instant. The shockwaves rattled through the office walls. I was no longer allowed to enter. What had been framed as Clinton's greatest achievement now turned into the loss that threatened the company's stability. Once word of the Dallas exit spread, other clients began to pay closer attention. Questions started trickling in, first polite, then pointed. Why had Zahara disappeared so suddenly? Why were promised results failing to materialize? It didn't take long for people to notice a pattern. The big wins Clinton boasted about had someone else's fingerprints all over them, and without that someone, me, the facade collapsed. What had once been whispered suspicions hardened into undeniable truths. Inside those walls, Marissa struggled to fill shoes she had never been qualified to wear. Her inexperience showed in every meeting, every misstep with a client. Reports circled back to me through old contacts. Presentations riddled with errors, late responses to critical inquiries, even one embarrassing incident where she confused two major accounts during a pitch. The board had hoped her name would carry her through, but her failures were too glaring to ignore. Clinton tried to smooth things over the same way he always had, deflection, charm, a carefully spun story. But this time no one was buying it. The Dallas fiasco had cracked the mask, and the more he spoke, the more people saw through him. Internal pressure mounted. The board members, once his allies, began to view him as a liability. The day came when he was called into a closed-door meeting and emerged without his title. Forced to resign, his downfall was swift and brutal. For a man who had built his image on control and power, being pushed out was the deepest cut of all. Employees whispered about how quickly the mighty had fallen, but no one seemed surprised. Beyond the company's walls, the damage followed him. Professional networks are tighter than most people think, and soon his name was circulating with a new reputation. Untrustworthy, self-serving, careless with both clients and staff. Opportunities that once would have been handed to him without question dried up. He wasn't the man admired in boardrooms anymore. He was a cautionary tale. As for me, I didn't need to gloat. Watching the pieces fall exactly where they belonged was enough. The truth had finally caught up to him, and the empire he thought was untouchable crumbled under its own lies. The call came on a quiet morning, long after the chaos had settled. The Dallas client reached out directly, their tone warm and resolute. They explained how impressed they had been with my leadership, how clear it was that I was the reason their campaign felt promising. Then came the words that shifted my world once more. They wanted me to join them not as a consultant, not as an assistant, but as the head of their in-house marketing team. The position was permanent, powerful, and tailored for me. I took a moment before answering, letting the weight of it sink in. This wasn't just a job offer. It was validation. They saw my value not because someone else vouched for me but because they had experienced it firsthand. Accepting felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen. Weeks later, I walked into their headquarters, this time not as a visitor hoping to win them over, but as a leader being welcomed. When the elevator doors opened to my floor, I saw my new office waiting. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, spilling across a desk that already held a vase of fresh flowers placed there by the team. It wasn't just decoration, it was a gesture of respect, a recognition of arrival. No trash bags, no humiliation, only gratitude and beginnings. Stepping into that space, I felt a calm strength I hadn't known in months. I ran my hand across the polished desk, letting myself breathe in the reality of it. All the pain I had carried from the past, the betrayal, the dismissal, the shame, shifted into something lighter. I wasn't defined by what they had tried to take from me. I was standing taller because of what I had built for myself. I sat in the chair by the window, the city stretched out beneath me, and let my thoughts settle into words. They tried to discard me like garbage, I whispered to the empty room, but I turned their betrayal into my stepping stone. The truth of it resonated deep in my chest. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. I hadn't needed to destroy anyone to find my closure. All I had done was reveal the truth, and the truth had done the rest. Now, with dignity intact and purpose renewed, I had a future that wasn't chained to someone else's ego. In that moment, I knew I was finally free. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away and building a new future, or should I have stayed and fought harder? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.